Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our program today at the Plano Public Library. This is one of our series of programs that we have moved to the virtual platform. And we really thank you for joining us during this time and really take the time and adapt to our flexible uh, new schedule. So thank you very much. My name is Evan. I work at Schimmelfinnig Library, and I'm here joined by Ms. Jamie Eastman from Harrington Library on 18th Street, and Mr. Bob Lofton from Haggard will be helping us with technology. Now, today's program will be mostly kind of like a lecture format, so I'll do the majority of the talking here. But I do have a couple of exercises throughout the presentation. And towards the end, we also have a Q&A section. So if you have a question that's coming up, you can either save it towards the end or feel free to start typing them in the chat section as we go. And if it's something that's really relevant to the ones we're talking about at the moment, we're going to address it right away. So today's program is part of our Write workshop series, which has been going on for a couple of years. We have 1 to 2 sessions per season. And this one is for November 2020. Now, some of you may be aware that November is the National Novel Writing Month, NANOWRIMO. So it's a perfect time to set a chunk of time aside for yourself and really work on that writing project you have been craving for all year. And, perhaps there's a lot of writing materials going on this year. And we can use this time to reflect and perhaps vent to use the writing medium as our partner during this stressful time. Now, world building. Our stories and the characters, they always need a world. And often we use the word setting to refer to time and space during the scene. But by world building, I really mean a little bit more than that. When we are talking about settings of a scene, they are really part of a whole. They never exist independently. They share the same fictional or non-fictional universe within your work, within your story. And in this world, consistent rules usually apply. And if you fully engage your reader, they will also want to know more, and they pay attention to the details. So really consider your work as a digitized photo. And readers, when they see something interesting, they may want to zoom in. And the more they zoom in, the blurry the photo gets. So we as writers, we just need to identify where readers are going to be interested in and put a lot of pixels in those areas. Make sure the resolutions are high so that no matter how much they zoom in, they'll still discover new details and discover interesting things in it to avoid disappointment. And that is world building, the construction of space. Now, world building is really important to all forms of literature, all forms of narrative. We often associate the term with sci-fi or fantasy because these stories often lead readers into a world that's completely different from our own. So the writer has the responsibility almost to construct a world from scratch. But it's not really always true for world building. You see, if we really have to think about it, what about historical fiction? Technically speaking, when we are reading historical novels, we are entering a different world as well. Even if it's still set on Earth, the same Earth that we live on, it's still a time that's different from our world enough for it to be almost their own fantasy world. So if historical novels will have to rely on world building, the same rule would have to apply to literary writing. If I write a story about say, Eastern Asia, and my readers are from the Western world, then I definitely have that responsibility in building that world in a convincing way. And if we're going to go even deeper, nonfiction narratives, documentary reportage, they all rely on world building. A world is a world, no matter how fantastical or how mundane it is. And even for a story set in the most commonplace possible, the details in that common setting will still say something about the character and the story. Really, it's kind of like looking into a transparent globe that we're looking at on this picture here. And without this globe, without this, without your story to hold this world together, everything will fall apart. Nothing can happen nowhere. You always need a place for the story to happen. Let's take a moment to appreciate this passage here. It's from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And this is the time when Dorothy and the party first came upon the Emerald City. Even with eyes protected by the green spectacles, Dorothy and her friends were at first dazzled by the brilliancy of the wonderful city. The streets were lined with beautiful houses, all built of green marble and studded everywhere with sparkling emeralds. They walked over a pavement of the same green marble, and where the blocks were joined together were rows of emeralds, set closely and glittering in the brightness of the sun. The window panes were of green glass. Even the sky above the city had a green tint, and the rays of the sun were green. I think that's a wonderful last sentence. It really reinforces that first impression. Just look at how many times green and emerald are mentioned in this short paragraph. There's no doubt the city is green. But the last part, it moves from the physical and human-made objects, the building and the clothing, to something more magical. The sky has a green hint, and the sun were green. So it does not really just highlight the color of the scene, but also the magic of it. And that's consistent with the world building of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. That is a magical story that doesn't take itself as seriously as you might think. Now that leads us to some major points here. First impressions. When your reader first enter the world that you created, whether you stop the narrative to fully describe the place, like what Baum did in the last slide, or that you slowly trickle in the details, readers will form a first impression as they go through the pages. So here I have a little chart that I very roughly divided some of the main points into different categories. Let's take a look at some of the more fundamental ones. Scope, for instance. How big or how small is your world? Is it a single world, or is it multiple places that's connected together? Is it a closed space, or is it an open space for the character to explore? And when we're talking about scope, really, it's hard to not mention The Truman Show, starring Jim Carrey. You probably know that Truman, or Jim Carrey's character in that world, is he lives in this giant dome, and everyone around them are actors. But taking the sci-fi aspect aside, we see this relatively big world that's closed. And that's what makes that movie so interesting. Because when you think about a closed space, it's usually a lot smaller. Like everything happens within the house or within a small town. But Truman's world was pretty big. And that's what makes the shock that everyone around him are actors so despairing for him. We can also take a look at some of the other categories. For instance, the fourth one, infrastructure. What's the basic infrastructure of this world, especially if it's a historical novel or a fantasy novel? In fact, say nature calls and they need plumbing or some sort of infrastructure equivalent to plumbing. What would that look like in this world? Small details like that, especially the things that we take for granted in the world that we live in, can often be the soul of the world that you are creating. Really, the point of the story here is don't take anything for granted, and there's always something to write about. Rules is another very interesting thing, and we're going to go into that in more details in the further slides. But the interesting part of it is what would happen if a character break the rule? If there's a rule about you cannot make a noise, like certain recent horror tropes, then when a character breaks that rule, that's where the energy of the story comes from. That's what makes it a lot more dramatic. But before we go on, I'd like to go back to some of the earlier points. Appearance, we probably don't have to go over that, but atmosphere here, especially for senses. Senses often relate to imagery, and this is one of the most powerful tools that writers can use. You can evoke the color, you can make an interesting sound. But here, there's another sense that we often do not use as much, but it's arguably the most helpful. So what do you guys think is the strongest human sense? What's the strongest human sense? Well, it's the sense of smell. What does your high school smells like? Now, as soon as I said that, if you're thinking back to a distant past, those memories are gonna come back pretty strongly. Now, I still remember how my high school smells like, especially that during that early morning when I have to get up and go to class at 7 a.m. I remember it really well. What about your favorite restaurant? What does a restaurant smell like? Especially if it's a local restaurant, they have a distinct smell that you always remember. So we want to invoke smell-related imageries and use that to hint at the world. So now I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes with all this information that we have taken in to just use smell-related imageries to describe a place. Don't worry about writing it for too long. Just 1 to 2 sentences will go a long way. If you feel comfortable, you can also share that in the chat section, and then we can see if we want to share it with the rest of the group. I'm going to start the timer. Now, Miss Jamie, because I'm using the web browser version of Zoom, I can't actually see chat. If we have anybody who shared it, feel free to read them. Otherwise, we can go on. Just let me know.
So far, we don't have anything in the chat. Oop, we just got one.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much. Let's hear it.
All right, we have the ocean and bread baking.
Very nice. Yeah. Actually, your voice went off a bit, but I think I caught ocean and bread baking. Was that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Oh, ocean. Wow, that always bring back some memories. Now, because it's well, let's diverge a little bit. Let's take a detour here. Because something like the ocean and definitely bread, it's rooted in our common memory. Those can be really powerful tools. So you can always use them in your writing. Hey, something else reminds you of the smell of the ocean. But if you're writing about ocean itself, then you may want to add a couple of details that will make your ocean really a special ocean to the reader. What about that ocean? What smell about that ocean really stood out to you? Maybe there's a distinct smell of the sand that you haven't seen anywhere else. And you can always use those details as metaphors and other literary devices to connect with the bigger story. Very good choices. Anything else so far?
Not at this time.
Okay, that's all right. And those are really just short prompts for you to see, um, really just trying to strike the iron while it's hot. If you don't feel like sharing, that's perfectly fine. If you have something more, feel free to put them into the chat as we go. So now, let's move on. Here's a little town. Looks like it has quite a bit of character there. A lot of historical, really cultural looking and has some really nice color. But there's something missing in there. There's something missing. And I'm pretty sure everybody would notice it right away, that it's so empty. So now we're going to go to the next level of story of world building, which is that we're going to move from just describing the place to describing the inhabitants. Inhabitants are part of the world. Just take this picture, for example. If I don't have this gentleman in the red jacket in there, it doesn't quite look like a library. Or otherwise, if I just have him in there, then obviously there's no place. Characters complete the place. And if some of you have been, some of you have been to some of my previous workshops where we talked about how we divide characters into different tiers according to their importance. So here, really, we can also relate that theory to how characters function in world building. For instance, here in this blue chart, I have 4 tiers of the characters. At the very surface level, we have stock characters. Those are your background characters. Say it's a really hot day and you're describing a scene. And in the scene, just a character briefly walks by. He feels really hot. So he opens up a bottle of ice water and dump it all over his head as he goes. That's it. That's his entire appearance in your entire story. He provides a background and he highlights the feature of that scene, which is that is very hot. If a character is more important than that, we have a minor character there. Within the same scene, let's say we have an ice cream vendor. So this person is really tied to the place, which is the ice cream truck or the ice cream stand. Or sometimes you can use him to showcase a role. If you happen to be in a place where, say, it's gonna be lame, it's cash only, or maybe you cannot buy any ice cream unless you give some sort of ticket in the festival, then this ice cream vendor would be a great way of showcasing that role. But really, the important part here is that he embodies a small place. He and the ice cream truck are basically the same being. If we move up another tier, we go to the major characters, who are recurring, who are a lot more mobile in your world. They can embody a theme or a value. And the interaction between major characters make up the dynamic in your world. A content creator that often uses this technique would be Christopher Nolan, the movie director. In his Batman trilogy, for instance, we see the Joker, who is the embodiment, the agent of chaos. But when the Joker appears in the Batman trilogy, he doesn't just work for himself as character building. He really represents how chaotic this world is. Just how much evil and chaos Gotham would have. So that's his function in that world. If we go up by another tier, then we go to the main character, the central character, the Truman of your world. So you are that evil, benevolent director, and you're trying to do all sorts of little things to your Truman. And the entire world, including every inhabitant in your story, will have to revolve around him. That's one way to look at it. Another way would be maybe Truman gets out and he would be a fish out of water. He would still stand out as the main character, and he still functions as a highlight to world building because he's so different from the world around him. And finally, remember that your main character is also the agent of the reader. Your reader sees the world through the lens of your main character. So if your main character is in a good mood or a bad mood, that will affect how the readers see the world as well. Just keep that in mind. We probably have time to do this other exercise as well. I just want you to write one sentence, but it better be a stellar sentence. We're going to pick a stock character or a minor character and put them in a location of your choice. For instance, I used that ice cream vendor in that really hot festival, but you may want to pick something else. Write one sentence and see how your character help you with building the world. I'm gonna start the timer. So many great examples from the Truman Show. If you haven't watched it, I consider it an essential watch for world building. Excuse me. I remember there's this couple of recurring minor characters who always intercept Truman in front of a advertisement poster. So every time they appear, they push Truman against that poster so the camera can zoom in on the advertisement to do that built-in advertising. But that constructs the world. It's a world where consumerism seeps into this popular TV show and also builds the world that Truman lives in, which is a fake world meant to promoting products. And the same thing goes with a lot of characters in Truman's World. His mother, for instance, always appears in this cozy home. All of the library people in that movie. Very, very interesting stuff. Another great movie I really want to talk about would be Groundhog Day. For the next session, we're going to focus on time, but we're going to mention a bit about Groundhog Day and how that relates to world building, probably toward the end of the presentation if we have the time. In that movie, you can see the same characters always appearing at the same place, precisely because the movie takes place within just one repetitive day. So you always see the salesman at the corner of the street, and he really becomes part of that street corner. All right. Okay. Ms. Jamie, do we have anybody who's willing to share for now? This is a more challenging exercise than the last one.
We do have one.
Oh, perfect. Let's hear it.
She was smiling and hopping along the grass, enjoying the cool in her face.
Jamie, I think you went in and out a little bit. I missed a couple of keywords there.
Before I read it again, why don't you go ahead and mute your mic?
Oh, yes. You know, here's the thing. I'm in a different browser. Let's see. Here we go.
All right. Our sentence was, she was smiling and hopping along the tall grass, enjoying the cool breeze in her face. And we have a second sentence as well. I am sitting by the seaside at 4 a.m. as the startling array of colors of the day, the sun rising while the waves nibble at my feet.
Oh, very good. Let's talk about them for a second. So in writing, we have this rule called the wall of recall, which basically means that when we're just starting to warm up, the first few things that come to our mind, we are kind of recalling it from past images, but they are often not our story just yet. So let's take a look at that. The first line, you know, she was smiling and hopping. I really like the word choice hopping there in the tall grass. But after hopping, we see this tall grass, which is not an image that we, how do I put it? It's not an image that we associate with the freshness of the jarring hopping there. So perhaps we want to pick something else for the word tall, or perhaps it's something else entirely for the breeze to make this world truly your own. So again, that'll go into the revising process, which we probably don't have time to go into right now. Let's see the second one. I'm sitting by the seaside at 4 a.m. as the startling array of colors of the day, the sun rising, while the waves nibble at my feet. Here, I really have a lot of praise of the verbs choices here. Verbs are the most powerful words that we have. We really want to stay away from adverbs and, to an extent, adjectives. But verbs, if you find a strong verb like nibble, that's always a great one to use. And here, perhaps we can do something about that. What about this place that that will really invoke that scene of the waves nibbling at the feet? Now, when I started that exercise, I was talking about how we can use this as a device to describe a stock character or a minor character. So just keep in mind that you don't always have to use first person for these characters. It can be just someone making a cameo. Maybe the main character is enjoying a day on the beach, or perhaps something terrible has happened, and they look to the side. Then there she is, this little schoolgirl who is just having a completely different mood and watching the waves. That may say something about the world that you're trying to build. All right. Let me go to the next slide. Let's see. So here we're going into the more important stuff. Everything up before this point, they're really the basics of world building. And they will give you a world where the reader will not drop the story or drop the book out of anger. But here, from the inhabitants, we're going to move to the level of the culture. This would mark the difference between a mediocre story and a really good story. Let's take a look. There's a concept called the cultural iceberg. Now, if you're a teacher, you may have heard of this term. Usually history teachers or social studies teachers may use this device to teach children about a culture different from their own. And they use this device called the 5 F's. It's really easy to remember. Food, flags, fashion, festival, famous figures. You can pick a random country, and then you can just find the 5 features from that country, and it seems like you understood it, that you have enough to fill a poster board for a class presentation. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you are a writer, especially if you want to build a believable world, you cannot just rely on a scene where the characters sit down and eat some food that your readers may not have always seen. You want to go deeper. What's their political system like? What about their economy? What kind of things do they do during work? What kind of things they do for fun? What language do they speak? In fact, what about the little phrases, little idioms, the sayings that they use in their language? All of these have a reason that they have developed. Language is a huge hint at what the world truly is. And from there, we can even go into the more abstract stuff that's at the core of your story. Values, social roles, who goes out to work? What's the role of women in this society? Family dynamics. Do the children, pay a lot of attention to the elderly? Do they form nuclear families, or do they usually branch out? All of these are crucial, and none of them are above the surface. It's always for the readers to discover. Let's take, for example, The Handmaid's Tale, a classic. It's by Margaret Atwood. Maybe you are a little bit familiar, or maybe not, but you may have seen this image of what the characters look like in this book, which is adapted into a popular TV series. It's a post-apocalyptic world, a dystopian society where women are extremely suppressed. And you see a bunch of these women as handmaids, and they dress in this red overall robe with a white headpiece. So that's the part that's above surface, the fashion part, one of the 5 F's. You see the red robes and the white wings. Now, even though I said they're superficial, they're not useless. It really goes back to my point about the first impression. They give the reader the first impression that something is incredibly wrong with the society. We just don't know what it is yet. So then we go into the mechanics of this world, and we see how their political systems go, or their social classes. And we realize, oh, hey, different women are divided into different classes, and they all have this weird term. Like some people are just called aunts or Marthas, wives, and of course, the handmaids. And then you realize in horror that their work is reproduction in this extreme, in this radical patriarchy. Even their language has something to do with the world. The main character's name is Alfred, which doesn't strike you as an extremely weird name at first glance. But then you realize that it's really supposed to be off space Fred, as in she is the property of a man named Fred. And of course, at the very bottom, at the very core of it, is a commentary on patriarchy. So once we delve that deep into the culture, we can take a step back and see how it come to be. How come this world is the way it is? And that has everything to do with history. World building is a three-dimensional process. We are not taking a snapshot of where the story takes place. Everything is always connected to everything else. But since we're writing a story, not a history textbook, we always want to consider how that history relates to characters. So every larger, historical context or social history will always relate to a character's past, their personal story. What has the character gained in this historical event? What has the character lost in this event? Now, the past doesn't have to be one way or the other. I divide them into really roughly three categories. We have the trauma, which is often used in dystopian novels. There has been a war, for instance, some sort of massacre, revolution, or some sort of social unrest. Then again, you have to consider what has your character gained or lost during those trauma. Or it may be something good. There has been a new discovery, or there's a new technological advancement, or something changed within society. There's a new court ruling. There's a new law that's passed that makes everything better. And it doesn't always have to be so dramatic because they can always be subtle. Power dynamic between groups, when that changes, that always creates something that would increase or decrease tension. Again, consider what has the character gained or lost in that scenario. History became legend. Legend became myth. This quote is from J.R. Tolkien. And really take a moment to just let that quote sink in. I like to point out that it doesn't always have to be a epic trilogy for this quote to apply. It can certainly apply to shorter works that's within a shorter span of time. But really, the point I want to make right here is that while you do want to reconstruct a history for your novel, don't feel like you have to be bound by it. Remember that you're inventing a history for the world you're trying to build to advance the current story, not the other way around. What becomes history? So legend becomes myth and history becomes legend. Then what becomes history? We've all heard the phrases, we are witnessing history, or we are making history. Because history is made in the present. And in your story, the present is the story you're writing right now. Your characters are making that history. So always remember that your characters and your world are always entangled. There's this another concept called world conjuring. Now, it's not a widely used term, but it has some popularity and for good reason. Basically, what some writers or supporters of this phrase is trying to say is that writers really should make up the world as they go, or the story should slowly reveal the world as they go. I picked this picture as the background for this slide because that's what it is. you see some mountains in the distance, you really don't have to recreate every detail for these mountain ranges. You only need the one that's right in front of the reader. If, if as the story progresses, the reader goes to the next layer, then of course you can reveal it. You can drag it out of the fog. But before that happens, there's really no reason to bump yourself on the head and info dump at the beginning of every new scene. You don't have to describe the velocity of every atom in your bedroom or in your living room to make that living room seem believable. You only need to describe a couch, for instance, or maybe just the texture of a couch, or how one cushion has been slit open for some reason, and that makes a believable living room. That's all you have to do. When you're describing a place, just remember every detail, every decoration is like a Chekhov's gun. Chekhov, the great Russian short story writer, has famously said that if you describe a gun in your story in first chapter, then by the third chapter, it must be fired for some reason. He's saying that everything in your story exists for a reason. Don't try to add any detail in it just for the sake of detail. A great example of this would be a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, a great writer from Argentina. He has written this short story called Tlon Ukbar Orbis Tertius. It's really strange because he's writing a main character who just so happens to be himself. In this story, the fictional Borges discovered this encyclopedia. And this encyclopedia describes this vast alien world of every social class, of this entire history, of everything cultural possible. Just imagine the Encyclopedia Britannica, except it's fictional. And with that encyclopedia, of course, you can reconstruct that world. It's world building at its finest. But we as writers, we don't have to include the entire encyclopedia in it. In fact, we get a sense of what this world seems like just from Borges' short story, from the excerpts that he fictionalizes from the encyclopedia. From the glimpse of it, we get the world. That's all we have to do. It's just as what he says in the foreword of that story collection. It's a laborious madness, an impoverishing one. The madness of composing vast books, setting out in 500 pages an idea that can be perfectly related orally in 5 minutes. The better way to go about it is to pretend that those books already exist and offer a summary, a commentary on them. We can substitute the word books here with really any other thing, features, culture, food. You only need to provide a hint. So that's been the theories of world building. We've spent a lot of time on the fundamentals of it, of why we want to do it. But now here I have a really short slide on what we do in practice. This is the only slide because everybody do it differently. And you can, some people prefer to write a summary, some people prefer to write as they go. You do whatever you feel comfortable, as long as you understand why or how we're doing it. Here are a few tips from me that may get you started. First of all, suspension of disbelief is your friend. If you're not familiar with that term, it refers to how when a reader opens up the new book, they will temporarily suspend whatever they know in the real world. They would accept that they are reading a story. If they're reading The Lord of the Rings, they wouldn't say, "Oh, well, orcs don't exist in the real world." No, they accept what Tolkien is giving them, and then they apply that rule to the novel. So whatever the most unbelievable thing in your novel is. If you want to get away with one thing in your world, try to put it as early as possible when the reader is still in a phase of the suspension of disbelief, because they'll take it in. Multimodality is another great tool. It really refers to how you tell a story from different angles and from different text. For instance, if I want to describe Dallas, I can use a pamphlet. I can write a novel about Dallas. I can write a newspaper article. I can write an online article. I can make a Facebook post about my trip to downtown. All of these are different modes to describe a place. So in your story, you may want to tackle that world from different angles as well. Don't give all the responsibility to the narrator. Don't feel like you have to describe everything within one paragraph. Characters' dialogues, or maybe letters exchanged between them. Those are all great ways to describe the world. Again, diversity is the main thing. No world exists that's a monolith. Even within what looks like a monolithic society, there's still going to be all sorts of different factions in it, just like the real world. So always keep diversity in mind. And again, it reminds me of the movie Groundhog Day. In that movie, we know that Bill Murray's character is stuck on the same day over and over. Every day he wakes up at 6 a.m. and he wakes up in the same hotel. And when he falls asleep and wakes up at 6 a.m., it's again that same hotel. He relives the entire day, starting at the same location. It also just happens that he is stuck in this small town bound by a blizzard. So he cannot leave that town during this one day. There is no realistic way for him to leave. So in that case, when he's stuck in time, he is in fact stuck in space. He is stuck in this world. So at first, on the very first scenes, we see that he didn't even explore the town. He's dying to get out of the town. He really hates this town. But since he's stuck in there day after day, he discovered every little detail in that town. He discovered what each stock character likes and dislikes about their childhood, because he would just start a new day and have a conversation with them. He also discovered, who may have a choking hazard during that day, or who is gonna have a flat tire during that day, because he took the time to explore. And that's really what we as writers are doing here. That we have a world, we already have that framework, and we just need to spend some time to explore every aspect of it and see which ones we want to pick out and put it in the final story. So that's all I have from me. On the right side of the screen, I have some photo credits. Just leave it on here so we have it in the video format. For every attendee, we are going to send you some handouts of today's notes, as well as a list of resources that may help you in writing. That's going to arrive in your email. This video will be archived, and I think we also have a link to that document, to that handout, if you happen to miss it. Next session, we are going to have another program of the same series. It's also from me at a writer's workshop, and we're going to focus on time. So today is about space. Next time is going to be about time. And in the meanwhile, please look to our website and our social media for other programs for adults and for children. So I have some time to do some Q&A. I'm going to leave the screen up for a bit. Feel free to type in any questions, comments in the chat area, or if you want to share your writing from our exercises, feel free to do so. Let's see. Groups or writers groups. I think there are a few within Dallas. Let me see. I can, let me talk to my colleagues and hopefully I can give you some links in the later blog posts that we're going to post on the blog hosted by Plano Public Library. There are some online lectures that they give out for free. As for within the library though, unfortunately, we don't have that going for now. And it's especially difficult because of the pandemic during this time. Yeah, you're welcome. That's why I do this kind of programs. I know that there's going to be some aspiring writers who's trying to learn from everybody. My rule of thumb is read 100 books, write one. So, you know, it's important to hear about everybody's theory, but really the key to good writing is still about reading. You want to pick out the great books, great movies, and try to apply what we learn from lectures in there as you observe how they tell their stories. So I'm an employee of the Plano Public Library. Any content that I develop, it's for this organization. I believe I have one lecture from last season that should be archived. So if you go to the PPL YouTube channel, you may be able to find some of the past programs. I think there may be at least one up there. And anything before that, it was before the pandemic, so I do it in real person, and I don't have them recorded. I'm gonna leave this screen up for another 4 to 5 minutes. But if you have your answers, your questions answered, then thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you have a great day. If you haven't eaten, definitely go get some food right now. And I'll hopefully see you in a couple weeks on November the 18th. Oh, of course. Let me go back to my other screen here. Let's see. Can anybody see this fancy thank you screen? That'll be my name and my work email. So if you have any question, feel free to email right there. Sometimes I send a group email to all past attendees to remind them of an upcoming program, which I forgot to do today. So I'll try to remember next time for the program coming up in 2 weeks. And by the way, I work at Schimmelfinnig Library. During this time, we don't have a lot of study spaces, and we encourage people to come in and out of the building right away. But if we have, when things settle down a bit more, I'd always be happy to talk to you if you come into the building. Let me see. So it looks like the registration link for the second session is not up yet. It's likely because during the pandemic, nothing is set in stone. But I would definitely look to our Plano Public Library's calendar for the next session. I'm going to talk to my colleagues right away to make sure they have the link up there. But you just go into November and search for the right workshop. Yes, November 18th, same time. I think I missed someone's. Someone asking where I was? Schimmelfinnig Library. It's on Custer and Spring Creek. If you look up Plano Public Library, out of the 5 locations, the one that looks really strange, that's where I work at. And I couldn't pronounce that name before I started working in this building at all either. So don't worry if you don't know how to pronounce it at first glance. Okay. So it looks like we're all okay here. Again, my email is up there. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have some question that you really need answered. And then I'll see you guys in a couple weeks. Thank you for coming.